Reports reveal that Israel's Prime Minister has condemned France's support for a recent UNESCO resolution, leading the French government to backtrack. The New York Times releases a bombshell report revealing Donald Trump's treatment of women. And the EU referendum campaign heats up as British Prime Minister David Cameron says staying in the Union makes Britain stronger economically. Good evening, this is i24 News. I'm Gabrielle Weiniger. In our top story this hour, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has sent a strongly worded letter to French President François Hollande to condemn Paris's support for a controversial UNESCO resolution. This just days before the French leadership apologized for the vote to support the resolution. All this according to Israel's Channel 2. The UNESCO document spoke of an occupied Palestine with no mention of Jewish ties to Jerusalem. Meanwhile, French Foreign Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault is set to arrive in Jerusalem later today in a bid to persuade Netanyahu to accept France's efforts to engineer a peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians based on a two-state solution. Haaretz Daily reported that Netanyahu is set to strongly criticize the French plan during his talks with the foreign minister. Now, former US President Bill Clinton has defended his record on Israeli-Palestinian relations, as well as Hillary Clinton's record, when an audience member at a campaign event today pressed him on the issue. Clinton was explaining his wife's policy positions when a heckler asked, "What about Gaza?" Bill Clinton responded by saying that he, quote, killed himself to give Palestinians a state, citing his efforts during the Camp David peace accords. Our diplomatic correspondent Oz Rosenberg gave us more details.
The question was, what about Gaza? And Clinton addressed that and said, I killed myself, and she had killed herself, and I had killed myself on trying to make peace in the Middle East, and then tried to explain a very delicate issue that certainly people from the Clinton administration, but also people from the current administration, the administration that came afterwards, are having trouble understanding, and people from the Clinton administration has been having trouble explaining, and that is how, in one hand, how to make peace in the fact that, in one hand, the U.S. has let's call it disagreements on Israel about certain issues, about the Israeli control in the West Bank, and on the other hand, not only morally but also financially supports Israel. I'm talking about $3 to $3.5 billion a year in military aid. And how does these two come together?
Well, now staying with the US, and the New York Times has released a shocking report today detailing Republican nominee presumptive Donald Trump's treatment of women. The Times interviewed 50 people for the story, titled "Crossing the Line: How Donald Trump Behaved with Women in Private," from employees of the Trump organization to former girlfriends and Miss Universe contestants. And to discuss, we're joined by a correspondent in New York, Danielle Zeri. Hi, Danielle.
Hi, Gabrielle.
Now, a bombshell report there by the New York Times. What's your interpretation of these interviews?
I mean, look, Gabrielle, this is nothing new for anyone who's followed this campaign or Donald Trump in general. In fact, if you remember, this was one of the first things that he was confronted about in the first debate about his relationship with women. And he has a women problem, and we know this. So this article from the New York Times shows his past issues with women in the 90s, as you said, with co-workers or Miss Universe contestants. But there are many examples of this just in the recent years or months. It started with the Rosie O'Donnell, who he called fat and ugly. And if you remember, Carly Fiorina, the former candidate on the Republican side as well, who he attacked on her face. And of course, we've seen him deal with Megyn Kelly from Fox, the anchor, who he said had blood coming from her wherever. And by the way, she has a very important interview coming up with him on Tuesday, which this issue is probably going to be raised in this interview. But that fight with her was very public. And even more recently, he tries to attack now Clinton on women, which will be interesting. He said that Clinton was an enabler for her husband's marital indiscretion. So trying to attack Clinton on the card that she's probably expected to do most well with women. I'm not sure how it's going to go for him, because we know that a recent poll conducted by CNN, I believe in March, showed that 70% of women in America have unfavorable opinions of Donald Trump. So we'll see if he manages to turn this around.
Well, Danielle, you're not surprised by this report, but maybe our audience wants to know, what's the most shocking revelation that was revealed in that New York Times report?
I mean, in this New York Times report, he talks, the women that were interviewed by the New York Times talk about him asking them to change into a swimsuit or all kinds of, publicity stunts that he's done with them. I think that what is shocking that maybe this New York Times report turns a little more physical about women and a little bit more into his physical relationship with them probably. But I think this is really nothing new for people. What it does, though, is it gives a really good expose of sort of his relationship with women dating back to the 1990s. So I don't think people are going to be shocked by this report at all, but I do think that it paints a very good picture of a timeline, sort of his relationship with women.
Okay, Daniel Ziri, we'll wait to see what happens there on Tuesday. Daniel, our correspondent in New York, thank you for joining us. Now, Syrian rebels are responsible for the assassination of a senior military commander, so says Lebanese Shiite militia group Hezbollah. A statement released by the group today blamed Syrian opposition fighters called Takfiri for the killing of top commander Mustafa Badrin, who was killed in an explosion in Damascus in the early hours of Friday morning. i24 News defense correspondent Ania Ronheim has the story.
Hezbollah has officially blamed Syrian opposition groups for the killing of top Hezbollah commander Mustafa Badreddin in Syria. His death is the biggest blow to the Iranian-backed organization since its military chief was killed in 2008, and hundreds of people attended Badreddin's funeral in Beirut on Friday. Hezbollah said Badreddin was killed in a big explosion targeting one of its bases near Damascus airport, caused by, quote, artillery bombardment carried out by the Takfir groups present in that region. The airport lies to the east of the city, where various rebel groups such as the Jaish al-Islam and the Free Syrian Army have a strong presence, but no group has yet to claim responsibility. Badreddin was one of the highest-ranking officials in the group. He had the reputation of being a ruthless killer and tactician. In 1984, he was sentenced to death by the Kuwaiti government for his role in a series of deadly bombings which targeted the American and French embassies as well as the airport. He escaped Kuwait after Iraq invaded the country in 1990 and released scores of inmates. Badreddin was also a key suspect in the 2005 assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri in Beirut. He was assessed by the U.S. government to be responsible for Hezbollah's military operations in Syria, where it is fighting alongside Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
First of all, he's the most senior Hezbollah military personnel in Syria. He's been known to be the middleman between Hezbollah, the Syrian government, as well as Iran. He's been coordinating all Hezbollah's military affairs and military planning in Syria since at least 2012.
Hezbollah has lost at least 4 prominent figures since January 2015. A number of high-ranking Iranian officials have also been killed either fighting Syrian insurgents or in Israeli attacks. Israel, which has struck Hezbollah targets in Syria several times during the conflict that began in 2011, had initially been blamed for Badreddin's death.
Now, British Prime Minister David Cameron today told supporters of the campaign to stay in the EU that membership makes Britain economically stronger and safer. The referendum on EU membership takes place on June 23rd. Let's take a listen to what Cameron had to say on the biggest day of campaigning so far.
It's about guaranteeing our economic security here in the United Kingdom. It's the most important thing there is. If we have a strong and secure and growing economy, that is what provides the jobs we need. That is what puts food on the table. That is what guarantees people's livelihoods. That is what pays for great schools like the one we're standing outside today. That's what pays for our health service. It's what keeps us strong in the world. And I'm absolutely convinced that our economic security will be better if we stay in a reformed European Union, and it will be seriously at risk if we were to leave.
Well, that wraps up our coverage here at i24 News. For anything you may have missed, you can check out our website. That's i24news.tv. Thanks for being with us and see you again at the top of the hour.